Well, greetings and salutations, test takers. This is Dean Tenney coming to you from my studio here in fabulous Las Vegas with our episode of our Series 7 Guru podcast. You can find this in video form on the YouTube channel, or you can find it on Spotify as an audio only file. Uh, I made the podcast to talk about things that don't lend themselves well to my YouTube channel's organization. My YouTube channel is organized around series playlists. So you find what exam you're taking, and then we hit up that series playlist and you see all the videos there. I think it was the right way to organize the channel. You don't want to try and find videos on the channel. It's like a needle in a haystack. There's almost 400 of them, but it doesn't lend itself well to having other discussions that people request that don't fit into a series playlist. For example, today's episode is the day before you test, and that doesn't actually fit into that kind of a format. So today, what we're going to be talking about in the podcast is the day before you test, 5 things you should consider the day before the test. So we're going to be talking about when to stop your study plan. We're going to talk about sleep and your circadian rhythm and how important that is to your cognitive capabilities on test day. We're going to talk about nutrition. We're going to talk about when is the time to arrive at the Prometric testing site and what things you should consider once there. And as I always say, everything I recommend to you is a buffet. Take what you like, leave what you don't. All right, so let's knock out our day before the test. When should you stop your study effort? I think you should stop about noontime the day before your exam. As a hypothetical, we'll say you're testing Friday morning. So that means Thursday about noontime is when you should shut things down. The last few hours aren't going to do anything except perhaps cause you to go backwards. So the day before in the morning, do some low key, light key stuff, low key review notes. I hear some bad advice about don't do any questions the day before your exam. And I think that's bad advice. Again, buffet. I think you should at least do 20, 30 questions, not to learn anything. We're never doing practice questions to learn stuff, but just to keep your testing rhythm. Because, you spend all this time kind of developing that rhythm and you don't want to have a disruption in that rhythm. So low key Thursday, if it's your testing Friday, day before in the morning. And I'd shut down things about noontime. You're not going to learn. The days of cramming are over. So what you don't know on the day before at noontime, you're not going to magically cram it in there. And, whatever you do cram in will probably cause something else to go out the other side of your brain housing group. So that means Thursday, if my hypothetical Friday, day before, the afternoon, evening, relax and enjoy whatever you like to do. I like to have a nice single malt scotch, maybe soak a nice Cuban cigar, whatever you do to kind of unwind and put on your game face, be thinking about your testing victory the next day. Maybe it's going to a movie. Beware of the day before anybody who may be an energy vampire. So I would guard your psyche that afternoon, that evening. And, hopefully you get the day off before your exam, the day before the test. And I would just tell people, hey, I'm fragile right now. I'm testing tomorrow. And try to avoid people as much as you can, unless they're going to be force for good. I joke, for example, when, people are calling me the day before the exam, I have a Hippocratic oath, first do no harm, right? So we don't want to be going backwards. Sleep is so, so important. So you need to get your sleep cycle or sleep schedule in rhythm with the test itself. Whenever your test is your natural, I would hope your natural circadian rhythm. What I mean by that, I'm better in the morning than I am in the evening. And so I want to be making sure I get some sleep. And I would run a reverse engineer my test date and the time of my test for my circadian rhythm. So sometimes it's nervous as being a normal part of this thing. So you just got to accept that. And so maybe you want to think about the night before getting some rest, because sometimes people suffer anxiety and they, oh man, I got to get sleep. I can't sleep. Oh my God, I need sleep. So maybe you start you're making sure you're dialing in that sleep. Now, my brother, on the other hand, is a afternoon person. So, it would be silly for him on his circadian rhythm to put his test in the morning. Most people mornings are better, but not everybody. And, my brother's an example of that. So if you can, not always possible, try and get that test time match up with your circadian rhythm and make sure you're watching that sleep cycle, particularly as you get a day or two out from the exam itself. You don't want to worry about, waking up. So one thing I would suggest is setting multiple alarm clocks, so that way you can sleep well, knowing that there's no way you're going to have any kind of a glitch in terms of the batteries are dead in your alarm clock or the power goes out. So set your phone, set whatever. Just that way you have multiple alarm clocks. That way when you're sleeping, you're not in your mind thinking, oh man, what if I miss this thing and sleep in? All right. So nutrition, breakfast is a must. You need to get some nutrition before you test. So we're assuming again in our hypothetical, for me, my circadian rhythm means I'm testing in the morning. So I want to like have a nice breakfast. I usually plan that out. What I mean by planning it out is I think, oh, what is a good breakfast meal? So, I like huevos rancheros, for example. Listen, don't listen to me about proper nutrition. That's somebody else's deal. I'm sure somebody watching this will tell me there's all kinds of great brain foods that may boost your brain power. I would not want to rely upon that, but do make sure you are not going to be, you're not going to be hungry. You're not going to be, dehydrated. So water. I'd pack some snacks just in case you do find yourself needing a little boost or something, so when you get there. Now, again, it's a buffet. When should you arrive the exam? I actually think 60 minutes would be my minimum, before I get there. You don't want to be frantic. You don't want to get stuck in traffic. In fact, I would try and familiarize yourself with your test site. So maybe you don't go on Google. Now, me personally, again, what Dean does isn't something that you need to do, but, suggestions, recommendations. I like to actually drive to wherever I'm going to be testing the night before or day before or the day before the test, just to see where I'm going, see what the traffic is. I like to have a cup of coffee, see if there's a Starbucks nearby or some other kind of venue to sit down and kind of, again, put on my game face if I get there too early. Even I said breakfast, if I can find a nice breakfast place that's across the street or somewhere near, maybe that's something I want to consider. If you do that, if you familiarize yourselves Google Maps or you actually drive there, if you have the resources, I'd strongly consider if you are going to be out of town to go the night before and get a nice hotel and relax if you have the resources. I have a person who said that her husband gave her a deal to watch the kids so she could leave, and she purposely put her test site hours away from her, location so that she could have that drive to kind of focus and have that night before in that hotel and then test. I thought it was a good idea if you have the resources. Some people don't have the resources. I had a guy said, I don't have the resources to do that. It is what it is. So, but if you can do that, that'd be great. But in no circumstance should you be arriving less than 60 minutes tighter than that, right? So 60 minutes or more is when you should be at the exam site. Okay, at the test center, try and minimize your distractions. If you, it's not always possible. I don't want to send out negative testing vibes, certainly, but boy, be careful. When you go in there, again, guard your psyche. If you can pick your spot, you see a spot that kind of speaks to you. I remember one time I was taking a test and I didn't want to sit in a particular spot. And, you got to be aggressive. And then the top proctor said, well, I said, listen, there's nothing that says I have to be uncomfortable. I don't find that particular spot to be comfortable for, it's kind of compact and, I like to spread out. So, trying to give some thought to that. Now you are allowed breaks and you might want to plan your breaks. So, most people aren't sustained for the amount of concentration timing wise on your exam. I had somebody who was doing their practice exams and about question 60, about halfway, they were losing. And I said, well, maybe you should just take a quick mental trip to Tahiti, and then refocus and come back. Don't be gone too long. Now at the exam, you can actually, get up and go out and use the restroom or, I'm not suggesting you should be studying. Again, we said you shouldn't be studying the afternoon before, and now is not the time to be doing anything. And, that's borderline cheating if you go out in the bathroom. I'm just talking about take a mental break. Go out in the restroom, flash some water, have some water in your little cubby hole they typically give you, get a splash and, kind of refocus yourself, refresh, reset. You might want to do that every third, maybe half. Again, whatever we're suggesting in terms of this day before your exam, put it into practice as you're doing your practice test, right? So if you plan on taking breaks at the Prometric Center, then I would highly recommend that while you're doing practice tests, just to make sure you have no time constraint, that you do the same. What I mean by that is if I'm planning on taking a strategic break halfway through my exam or a third as I'm doing my practice tests, I'm going to set my clock and take that break and make sure that I'm not going to be worried about whether I have any kind of a time constraint. Now, as we said, the day before your exam, when you fold up the execution of your study plan about noon the day before, you've got to be confident that you've executed the best study plan possible. So give that some thought as you're doing your study plan. Am I going to be ready to close up shop, noon day before my exam? And most importantly, on the day of your test, be confident in your answers. Do not be changing answers. Make sure, I always joke when you want to learn good test taking behavior, sometimes you can watch game shows. And sometimes, good test takers, they'll say they answer quickly and they say, is that their final answer? They say yes. Poor test takers go, well, I don't know. And they talk themselves out of the right answer and into the wrong answer. So be confident in your study plan. Most importantly, be confident in your answers on exam day. I would not change answers unless you know you got it wrong. I still wouldn't change it. And you know what the right answer is. Otherwise, just leave it alone and be confident all the work you put in is going to pay off with a testing victory. And you're going to make your mark. Okay, so I hope you found this podcast helpful. If you have any suggestions or comments, put them in there. We'll put them into the next version of this, and other test takers can read what your recommendations would be, good test taking strategies. And I'll see you for the next episode of our podcast. Remember, inch by inch, your exam is a cinch. Yard by yard, your exam is hard.